7, the consent calendar. These are items considered routine. Thank you, gentlemen. Half the crowd is now leaving.
Right.
Are there any changes to the consent calendar?
No changes.
No changes. Can I get a motion to approve the consent calendar?
Motion to approve. Second.
Is there any further discussion? All in favor to adopt?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? None. That motion passes unanimously. Moving on to item 8, presentations. I do not see item A, the Veterans Home of California Allied Council monthly update representative, so we will hold that in case they do show up. We'll move on to item B, a visual tour of the town's water and wastewater systems. I assume that will be our town engineer.
That's right. Good evening. Vice Mayor Chilton, Council. What I want to do is walk you through our water and wastewater system, essentially looking at the big picture. What is the system? What's in it? What is the town's responsibilities? It's a very large file, so it might take a minute here to load up. But essentially, the town council just adopted new water and wastewater rates. So I want to say, what does that pay for? We purchase water, we do maintenance, we do capital improvement projects. So we'll move along through here. So we're going to talk about the water system, wastewater system, expenses and revenues. The water system is broken down into 4 areas. There's the source. Where do we get our water? Where do we have it treated? It's transmitted across the valley to Yountville, and then we have a distribution, and I'll show you that. This is what I call the big picture. This is looking east across the Napa Valley towards Lake Berryessa. The Rector Reservoir watershed is shown there at the upper left. The transmission line comes across the valley and the Napa River to Yountville. Once the water is used by residents and businesses, it goes to the Joint Treatment Plant, which is a plant in 1977. The town and the Veterans Home entered an agreement for the town to operate and upgrade the wastewater treatment plant. They also installed a recycled water system as part of the NPDES permit, and that required the town to only discharge effluent treated wastewater to the Napa River during wet weather, which is usually the winter months, so from December through about May. So during the other months, during the summer, the water was sent across the valley to the vineyards over near Silverado Trail, and I'll get you a little more information on that as we go along. Whoops. We have 3 sources of water, which is envious of many agencies. We have the Rector Reservoir, which is across from the Fish and Game Office on Silverado Trail. We have a connection to the Lake Hennessy-Con Dam pipeline that goes from Lake Hennessy to Napa. And we also have an emergency well, which was built about 2004. If there's a drought condition or any interruption in these other 2 sources, then we can turn on the well and distribute water throughout the town. This is an aerial view using Google Earth of the dam and reservoir and treatment plant over at Rector Reservoir. This is a very clean watershed. There's not much housing. There's some vineyard, but it's fairly clean. It's just east of Silverado Trail. So going a little closer, this is the water treatment plant, which is operated and maintained by the Veterans Home. So we buy water from the state. The cylinder-shaped 6 things there on the lower left are the filters, and this was part of the original plant, and I'll get to that a little bit. When this plant was upgraded in 2004, those filters were backwashed into our transmission line, and so now we're dealing with sand in our both transmission and distribution system, and I'll show you a picture of that. And hopefully we'll get a tour. They've offered to give a tour to the town council and staff if you want to see that. This is a picture taken from Silverado Trail. You can see the dam and the spillway on the right and the treatment plant in front. In terms of our distribution system, we have several programs. We have a fire hydrant flushing program. This mostly has been to get sand out of the system, but also to clean the water in the system. We have a cross-connection prevention program. If there's a restaurant or a well or water treatment plant, we want to make sure that if there's a lower pressure or water line break, that the water doesn't flow back into the water system. We, of course, do water meter reading every 2 months, send out the water bills. The California Department of Public Health requires us to do sampling, testing, and reporting. The annual report and a consumer confidence report is going out here pretty quickly in water bills. We have water conservation and rebates for washer rebates and all. And then we also have the capital improvement program. We replace water lines and meters and other parts of the system that need to be replaced. This is a little hard to read, but this is our domestic water system map. Pretty much every street in town has a water line and fire hydrants and water meters and so on and so forth. So this map has the type of pipe, the age, so that we can look at when is a good time to replace these at the end of their design life, so they don't have leaks. We want to replace them before we get into that problem. This is what a pipeline would look like if you dig it up and you want to put in a lateral or replace it. This is the crew out flushing a fire hydrant out on Madison at Jefferson when you can see the sand here in the front of the picture. And so what they do is they flush that for 10, 15 minutes until they're not getting more sand out of the system. But this has gotten into people's sinks and clogged their fixtures and all. This is a backflow prevention device. Essentially, like I said, if there's a break in the water line, there's low pressure, then this will prevent water from flowing back into the water system. And these are tested and certified every year. Now, once the water is used, it goes into our wastewater system, which is our collection system. We have treatment at the plant, we have the disposal, and then we have a recycled water system. So the collection system, what we're looking at is reducing inflow of rainwater and infiltration of groundwater, because that water essentially goes to the wastewater treatment plant, and there's no reason really to treat it. Our plant is designed for 500,000 gallons per day. When it rains, we get up to over 2 million gallons a day, so we're trying to reduce that. We have a sewer system management plan. This has to do with our fats, oil, and grease program, planning for spills to clean up those quickly and put people in hotels if necessary. We also maintain and improve our pump station, and then we will replace sewer pipes and laterals. This map is the sewer collection system. The different colors are for different system lines. This, again, also has the year, the type of material. It all drains from the northwest near the cemetery to the southeast near the mobile home parks, and then it's pumped up to the wastewater treatment plant. This is a crew out smoke testing. This is where we check to see if any downspouts or area drains or storm drains are connected to our sewer system and try to reduce that inflow and infiltration. Next picture. This is a sewer manhole that was coated with an epoxy coating. This helps to keep the groundwater from percolating into the sewer manhole and into the treatment plant. This also is unique in that it has a bypass where what we've done is we've cross-connected some of these lines if they're close to each other, so that if one has a let's say it has a fats, oil, and grease blocking the sewer, it will backflow and overflow into another system instead of into the street. This is a crew out cleaning the sewer lines. Do this about every year to make sure that they're not getting clogged. This is our wastewater pump station. So all the wastewater comes here, and then it's pumped in a force main across the highway and up to the treatment plant. And this is a crew contractor installing a manhole as part of our sewer lateral project up on North Washington near Hotel Luca last summer. Now, in terms of treatment, we have primary, secondary, and tertiary. Many agencies that discharge the San Francisco Bay only have secondary treatments. With the tertiary treatment, we are able to recycle or use the recycled water for more uses. This is a schematic of the wastewater treatment plant of how the wastewater moves through the plant, how it's treated, and then discharged. This picture shows the primary and secondary. I'll get closer into that, but just wanted to sort of give you the big picture. And then the final, the sedimentation tanks, then chlorine contact chamber. The effluent pond is where the wastewater goes once it's treated before it's either discharged to the river or to the recycled water users. And this is just one of the control panels. Hopefully with our SCADA project, we'll be able to computerize some of this old equipment. So as the wastewater comes into the plant, it goes in this primary sedimentation tank. On the left is a brown rectangular building, which is called a digester. A lot of the solids are sent to the digester where it's like a big stomach that treats the solids, and then it's sent out to the drying beds, and then it's hauled off to landfill. The liquid will continue on. That's the digester. This, again, is where we want to do the methane capture project, so we can start reusing some of the methane to put into the burners, the heaters that heat the digester. This is the primary trickling filter. From here it drains over to the secondary sedimentation tank, which is essentially parallel and similar to the primary, and then a secondary trickling filter, which is very similar to the primary. From there it gets mixed up in the solids contact chamber and then goes into the final sedimentation tank. Comes out of here fairly clean, but we also, if we're sending water to the recycled water users at the golf course or the wineries, we'll send it through the fuzzy filter. It's a funny name, but it just takes out all the rest of the sediment that was in the wastewater. Then it goes into this chlorine contact chamber. It moves back and forth through these chambers to give it what's called contact time. So it disinfects. So the chlorine is mixing with the wastewater for a long enough period of time that it is completely disinfecting the wastewater, so it can be discharged to the river, the recycled water users. From here, it goes to the effluent pond. If it's going to be discharged to the river, we dechlorinate, which means we have to add another chemical to take the chlorine out. If it goes to the recycled water users, it's not as necessary to take out the chlorine because it pretty much has no chlorine left by the time it gets to their ponds. I mentioned the wet season, dry season. In 2004, the town recycled 43% of the effluent that came out of the wastewater treatment plant. In 2009, because it was a dry year and there was lots of demand for the wastewater or the recycled water, there wasn't a lot of supply because we didn't get a lot of rain inflowing and infiltrating into the system. The town recycled 83% of the effluent, which is very high, and I have not found another agency that's had that high a recycled rate in the state. This back to the big picture with the Rector watershed to the left and the wineries to the right and to the east. You see the Veterans Home, Highway 29. This is a map. It shows the recycled water users that are currently customers. We have the Mondavi property, which is west of Silverado Trail, and they have 4 ponds. And then there's the Stag's Leap, Clodoval, and Chimney Rock, and they have ponds, and they actually have some more ponds. We'd like to talk to them about also putting in some more piping to those ponds so they maybe can take more storage. Some of the new wineries we're talking to about our recycled water project, which is a state-mandated project with our permit, so I just sent a letter off to the regional board asking them if, about this project, describing it, and just received proposals today from consultants on the design of that project. To looking at Behringer, Silverado West. We call it West because there's also another pond that draws water out of the river on the east side of the river. And then the Herrick Ranch, which is has another pond, which actually is fairly large, and it wouldn't be very far to build a pipeline over to it. And then last is the Veterans Memorial Park. If we can take a pipeline up there and have a tank to both get domestic and recycled water, we could irrigate the park. So that's sort of a picture of our existing and potential system. The Vintners Golf Course takes about half of the recycled water. It goes into the pond up behind the restaurant, and then they irrigate the park and use the other 2 ponds at the lower left. Also, this picture also shows below the effluent pond is what's called the overflow pond, and that's where if there's more than 2 million gallons of wastewater coming into the plant, it will overflow into that pond. It equalizes, and then after the storm, we'll treat that water. And the 2 ponds at the very bottom are the sludge drying ponds, and that's where once the sludge comes out of the digester, it's put there during the summer. In the fall, we have it off-hauled to the landfill. This is a picture of the irrigation pond over at Mondavi. They can both take river water or recycled water, and if you drive around the valley, you'll see these like Ragusi and several other holding ponds. They can also use this for frost control. So with this, I want to sort of give you a preview of going to the budget process and sort of going from the biggest to the smallest. The purchase of water is our largest expense. There's about $600,000 a year just to purchase water from the Veterans Home. Then we sell that water, and then people pay their water bill. Salaries and benefits is a large cost for us. The electricity and gas, which is more than chemicals. So that's why we're looking at energy efficiency and the methane capture is trying to reduce these costs. Contract services are for consultants for permit issues or construction, and then chemicals and equipment maintenance. We also have the capital improvement program where we have the state-mandated recycled water project, improvements to the joint treatment plant or to the pump station or the collection system. So we replace the wastewater pipes, water meters, blow-offs, so on and so forth. Where does the money come to pay for this is we have 2 enterprise funds. One is the water enterprise fund, so people pay their water bill, and then they have the sewer bill. And those funds this year, now starting March 1st, we'll have a replacement fund. So there's a fee also collected to replace these systems. The Veterans Home pays for half the costs at the joint treatment plant. Those could be either operating costs or the capital costs to improve the plant. We also have the sales to the recycled water users, and we'll be looking at that when we do the recycled water project. And we also collect developer impact fees when a property develops, and then those fees are collected with the building permit, and those go to pay for capital improvements. So in conclusion, why we're doing this is provide safe, clean, and reliable water. So when people turn on their tap, the water comes out. And minimizing the pollution in the Napa River is mandated by our permit, and also to minimize the expenses of having these systems and programs. And at that, I can answer any questions you may have.
Have any questions of staff? Councilwoman Mueller?
Thanks for that report, Graham. Can you tell me a little bit about the sand? I know it got backflushed in 2004, but it's still kind of chronically finding its way in all the places we don't want it to find its way into. So is there any, is that just something we're going to have to kind of live with flushing periodically, or is there something we can do to get rid of all that sand that's causing us problems?
Well, there is. The town hired Belgian Race to do a study back in '05, I think, and it looked like about $80,000 to $90,000 to go in and open up the pipes and either use, I call them polypigs. Essentially, it's a polyurethane plug that they push through the pipelines, and that helps push the sand out. The Veterans Home, it's their transmission line, it's their sand. It said, back in '06 or so that they essentially gave the town a discount on the price of water, and that was sort of their compensation. So in the capital improvement program, there is an option for doing this cleaning of the water lines. We don't want to go and clean all our distribution line if there's still sand in the transmission line between the treatment plant and the town. So I've been talking to the Veterans Home about, would you guys do a 50-50 cost share or something like that? So, but haven't gotten really a response from them yet.
Thanks.
Any other questions?
Yes, Graham, I'd like to ask what kind of testing you do on the drinking water that comes out of our taps, please.
Okay. Sure, there's several. One that comes to mind is copper. We have about 10 property owners in town who take a sample of water in the morning, and then we run that to CalTest and do some testing on that. They'll also do, I'm trying to remember the others, but there's a long list that the California Department of Public Health has us run, and we do those in an annual report to them. And then there's the Consumer Confidence Report, which says, which mostly comes from the Veterans Home because they treat the water, and it says these are non-detect, or this is the quantity, this is what the range is acceptable for everything from pathogens to other chemicals that may be in the watershed, mercury, that kind of thing. So without having the list in front of me, I don't quite have the list.
How often is I guess it's not always checked for everything every day.
Correct.
Okay.
Every day they do certain tests at the treatment plant just to make sure that they're getting all the pathogens and everything so the water is clean enough to drink. And then over the year they keep track of those and do an annual summary report. So there are some tests that they do at the treatment plant every day. And there's some that we do every 3 months, and some we only do once a year. So it just varies based on the schedule that the permit requires.
I see. Thank you for this, and I look forward to the trip up there.
Oh, sure. Good.
If I will, just piggybacking on a comment that our Public Works Director, Graham Wadsworth, mentioned, the annual water quality report. Folks can look forward to receiving that shortly. We were just, staff has just been producing that and stuffing that, and it should be going out in the mail. If it hasn't, it'll be going out shortly. So something to look forward. Part of it's very technical, and some of it's a little bit more informative, but I think the answer to your question is California has fairly strict monitoring requirements, and I think that's a good thing. And we take that responsibility very seriously and report the results. And again, ours is a shared system because the transmission line and the treatment are the responsibility of the state, but what also happens to the water and the distribution lines is our responsibility.
Thank you.
Anything else?
I'll say something somewhat witty, but maybe also maybe actually real. I noticed that the sludge drying pond is right on hole number 3 or 4, and there's got to be an opportunity for revenue generation by picking up the golf balls that I've hit in there, let alone what other people have hit into that. But no, thank you for the report.
Okay, I will not ask for any more questions after that comment. We will take a step back in the agenda to item 8A. I see our representatives from the Veterans Home of California, the Allied Council. So, Mr. Olson, do you want to make a report, or do you have someone else to make a report from the Allied Council?
Thank you. Ed Warren, you're going to say something? No, you said, I already said something. Wally's going to do it? Or Bob? No, I guess it was, I'm sorry, there were so many of us here, I can't remember. I guess Bob was going to, Bob the Heist was going to give a report. Well, he's got something, I think I can share with him about our tree project, which is rather...
Step on up to the microphone, Mr. Heitz.
Come on down.
I'm Bob Heiss from the Veterans Home, and I have met many of you as you've come to various council meetings. So thank you for having us here, and I'm always happy to give a report of what we're doing. I was very interested in the report that was just going on. I'm also chair of Buildings and Grounds Committee, and as you may know, last summer we did a very extensive smoke test on a lot of our sewer lines and storm drain, and we did have some cross connections that they straightened out. We have more to do, which will be done this summer, if money is not an issue. But getting back to the tree project, a quick summary: we've identified some 370 trees around the Alameda, of which I have 314 signs I'll be putting on trees. Some are, like, we're not going to put a sign on every redwood tree when they're in groves, but we have about 314 individual signs. Additionally, we have 34 sidewalk signs, curbside, which will point to groups of trees. And I don't know what the weather's going to be like next week. If the weather is good, quite possibly we'll have our unveiling next week. So if that turns out to, we find the weather's going to be good, we'll certainly let all of you know. And we've been working about 18 months on this project, and we're just real anxious to get the first signs in. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Is that all? Step on up, Ed.
Might as well get up here. That's how I like to talk anyway. I'd just like to say that it's nice to be able to participate in the council here on a regular basis, and we appreciate that. As I said before, I would also like to say, you know about the wellness fair that we're having at the home. I would assume everybody by now knows about that, and I assume that the city itself is going to have a booth of some sort there, or are you? There will be, okay. And that should be a great affair, and we're looking forward to all of you coming over there. And the outside booth will be great. We will have some things on the inside, too, and we're trying to get a few decorations put up inside to make it a little more interesting. And as you may know, we still haven't got full opening of the Member Services Center. We're still waiting for the cafe and a few other things to happen. The bowling lanes will not be happening for quite some time because they have to put in all new equipment. So there'll be new pin setters, and then because of that, new equipment. So the old equipment, the ball return was somewhat above level, and now they have to go underground with the new equipment. So now they got to dig out the concrete between the lanes and figure out how they can get that in there. So that's a bigger project, and we hope that would have to happen, but that will happen. We do have the money for it, so everybody will look forward to that. You guys can come over and bowl a little bit. Anyway, I guess that's about all I have to say. Well, we will have, I think it's the 14th of April, the Calvet Board is going to be coming up here and have their meeting at the home. So that might be a time for a few of you people to come over and participate a little bit in that. So
Mr.
thank you
Olson,
very much.
or maybe Samantha, do you know the exact date of the wellness fair?
The wellness, what is it? 27th of April.
Yeah, Wednesday, April 27th.
27th of April,
Wednesday, April 27th.
yes.
Excellent.
Okay,
Thank you very much.
you're welcome.
And with that, we will move on to item 9A, which is our lone public hearing tonight. As stated before, there's been a request to continue this item to our meeting on April 5th. However, I will open this public hearing. Do we have any additional staff report based on that? That's the end of the staff report. I will open up public comment
Just open public hearing and continue.
and continue it.
Yes, with a
Okay.
motion to continue, please.
Motion to continue to the meeting on April 5th, 2011.
Second?
And all in favor?
Aye.
Anybody opposed? No? That passes unanimously. We will continue that item to April 5th when the mayor returns. Item 10, 10A. This item is about the Yountville branch of the Napa City County Library. We have a resolution to consider about approving a long-term lease between the town and the county of Napa. Can we have a staff report?
Yes, Vice Mayor, Council. As you know, the Town Council established a library ad hoc committee and also provided some direction that staff work with the Napa City County Library System and the County of Napa, one, to review our existing agreements, secondly, understand the new CAM model, and most importantly, and when I say that, it's not that it's third, but work to identify ways of which we could improve hours of library service. And then I think an overall theme was that the town needed to be more involved in understanding managing our relationships with the library. So with that, the ad hoc committee has met several times. The ad hoc committee was previously constituted of Vice Mayor Chilton and Council Member Moeller. That particular body had a fairly extended meeting with County Library Director, County CEO Nancy Watt, and Supervisor Luce, along with some library support staff. With that, we've been working on several fronts. The outcome of that particular meeting was to focus on evaluation of what would be considered a no-cost lease agreement, with the premise being that if there was no cost associated with the library space, that would have a positive impact on the number of hours the library's cost allocation model generated. Historically, I will point out that the town had a lease agreement for approximately a little over $1,000 a month, or about $12,000 a year. There were no metrics or definitions, and that particular lease had been flat for a very long period of time. Also, in that same vein, the town had an agreement with the Napa City County Library System for approximately $16,000 for 6 hours of what was extended library service. And I will point out that the town library facility is operated by Napa City County Library System. It is a dependent subsidiary of the county. It does have a funding structure. So there is a base hour allocation that the library system provides, and then historically the town had been paying for these 6 hours on top. And again, no metrics, no real definitions as to what was included in those. Conversely, when the new CAM was approved by the Board of Supervisors, they incorporated our $12,000 in our fixed costs from the lease. And as you all may recall, during our budget discussions, they also explained to us that the CAM generated new extended library hour costs. They were costing out the whole system, including all the other branches in the library system as well. Council and staff were somewhat surprised when the hours, the cost per extended hour came out to $10,520, which meant the cost to continue the historical 6 hours would be $63,000. At that point in time, that's when the council provided direction to work on ideas to improve it. We kept the $17,000 that we'd historically budgeted in our budget, but did not provide authorization to expend it. So in the course of the discussions, one of the outcomes was that if there was a no-cost lease, that would generate an approximately 2 hours of additional library service based on the current camp. And that's an important footnote because that's not a guarantee that it'll be 2 hours every year, but that's what the base cost expenditure. So that's something that the ad hoc committee felt was something to consider, again, focusing on the objective of increased hours of library service. Staff also identified that in our current situation, we really needed to identify county funding partnerships towards their share of future system space rehabilitation as part of a shared facility, things like system replacement, the photovoltaic, the electrical, HVAC, et cetera, a part of the shared community center, and how that was going to be addressed if there was no funding structure, because then that would just mean that the town was absorbing all of the cost associated with the library, the space, and the operating, and we didn't feel that that was quite equitable. The current proposal before you results in a no-cost lease, establishment of a dedicated Yountville capital funding project fund with an initial deposit of $229,000 by the county into that fund along with future interest. A footnote that the no-cost lease is valued at 2 hours of additional service, will adjust annually. Again, the capital designation fund with the outline of 18.84% cost share also significantly overhauled the outdated liability insurance and indemnification language, and because it is a proposed 20-year agreement, that it also has a review period every 5 years to make sure that the indemnification and liability thresholds are adequate. The ad hoc committee, and I'm going to use the term reluctantly, and I'm sure that they will add, this process has been frustrating and challenging, but I do think from the perspective, the proposed lease agreement works. It does establish, the library director advised me that she would begin immediately upon approval of this, that the Saturday hours would be extended by 2 hours initially, and then if the council was to reconsider additional community resources, then we could look at perhaps restructuring the hours overall. With that, again, I will turn that over to Council Member Moeller and Dornbecker to add some comments on. It's a better than nothing outcome. I think we had hoped that we would achieve greater number of increased hours and some greater recognition of the unique situation in Yountville, that while this results a step forward in many ways, it's not it didn't get us everything that I think the committee had hoped that it would. But it also, I think, does establish a seat at the table and allows us to continue to have a more active dialogue with the library system and also with the commission as we move forward to understanding how the CAM works and what our community's interests are.
Thank you very much. I think before we get to, I want to hear comments from the two commissioners. Before we get to that, do we have any specific questions of staff about the proposed lease agreement?
I have a question, just make sure I understand the way I read this. So back in July of this last year, 2010, there was a study done throughout NCCL where they went and reallocated the hours associated with all the different libraries in the county, and we ended up getting a 1.5 hour increase. Is that's what I read? Is that how I understand it?
On the base hours.
On the base hours, precisely, not the extended, but just on the base hours. So they went to Calistoga, they took some away. They went to Napa, they gave some. And do we know or believe that the base hours increase was because of utilization on Yountville's part, or was it just really the first time they went back and?
That, without going into and answering for the library staff, because I won't preface, that was a distribution based on current expenditure, and they're plugging all their cost in. So that particular one has nothing to do with utilization. As it moves forward, I shouldn't say nothing to do with utilization. It factors in the existing utilization at that point, but it doesn't factor in changes in utilization, which is one thing the formula will do on an annual basis going forward. So the challenge to Yountville was that we fundamentally changed our service delivery as well. We went from a small library to a slightly larger small library with some additional service components, and had been open longer because of the extended hours that the town funded. But it reflects the base at that level when the board adopted it. Going forward, the CAM model takes in utilization, and it does have an annual readjustment that they look at, and the idea is they're trying to allocate the fixed cost for the various, I use the word branches, but that's not exactly the terminology we're actually referring to as a station, which is their smallest service delivery unit, and into the overall main system. So the baseline really is exactly that. That's exactly what they determined was, here's where the revenue is going and the programs and activities to support it and deliver the system as the current library system budget was established for fiscal year 2010-11.
Okay. I think I understand. It's a complicated formula that, is that correct?
Not really.
I don't know that I would say it's complicated. I would just say that it's not, one, the library had a consultant develop the formula and put in the various factors. There's county admin and overhead charges, there's their utilities, there's their personnel costs, there's, coupled with that, the library also changed their staffing policy for this branch at that same point in time. So when you put all of those elements together, it basically led to a whole lot more cost for our branch than what had previously been allocated, although it had never been necessarily documented in the allocation, if that makes any sense. So we kind of received a double whammy of changes at that point in time.
Okay. No, I understand.
Clear?
It's mud.
Let me ask a question before we get some more comments from the council. In the resolution, it refers to the capital monies as going into something called the Yountville Capital Designation Fund. Are those funds held by the county, or are they transferred to the town?
Those are held by the county, and that's actually a fairly typical structure, and that's why the language in the agreement outlines the formula. It also outlines that all the interest earnings and then a process for us to submit and get the money back. Be very similar for those of you that have recall the experience that we have with obtaining our Measure A funding. There's also language in the resolution in the agreement that says, the county can't withhold the money for legitimate purposes, and you'll note there's also a chart that identifies which the town developed, not the county, I will point out. We developed the chart based on the construction outline and the various facilities associated with the construction of the community center.
If at the end of this lease there is unspent capital funds, does that revert back to the county?
Yes, in all honesty, that would, because those funds come from the county. I mean, if they're not used for the capital projects identified in that chart, you'll see there's a fairly, they do have a purpose and they do need to go for the expenditure, although I would certainly do my best on the council's behalf to make sure that the funds are expended on the appropriate capital replacement.
I had a feeling on that. Okay, before we get to public comments, we will, of course, have discussion. Councilor Mueller, do you have some additional comments to report on before we continue?
I think, just to be clear, these 2 hours that we're going to get in exchange for no rent really are going to start, practical purpose time we get this signed, April 1, and so we'll have April, May, and June. And then we don't know what's going to happen. So, because what they've been doing this last year is actually paying the portion of the rent. So that's all we're really talking about is these 2 extra hours through June, which, quite frankly, be hard for even the public to know it's open 2 hours longer, which will be part of the challenge. So that's really, an issue that we don't know starting July 1 when they redo the amount of hours that were going to be allotted and redo their own determination of how many hours we're going to get in exchange for free rent. Those are real unknowns, so I just want to make sure that everyone kind of knew that. I think that Steve probably put it most accurate when he said that we're reluctantly approving this. And the way I view this is what we're doing, since we really have had poor to poorly understandable paperwork in place, we're just taking the very first step in putting together documentation with the library system. So what this really, all it really does is documents in writing that we're going to be given this money for overhead replacement facilities and things like that. Our real goal of our ad hoc committee to get more hours is not achieved yet. I plan on still working to get more hours, and I think there's a lot more issues coming up. So I reluctantly say we should go ahead and approve this because it documents that we're going to get that money. It's the beginning of a series of discussions and maybe a series of more agreements that we end up putting in place. So that's kind of my view of the world right now. We've taken one little step and we've got more work to do.
Great, thank you. Councilor Dornbecker?
I am very reluctant. I also, though, came very late to the negotiations and talks, and I do, defer to the ad hoc committee's results from before. However, I agree with Councilmember Moeller. We will continue to work on, improving the situation and trying to get more hours. And this model that they came up with, which was sort of bolt from the blue, did result in Calistoga also losing hours and American Canyon gaining hours. Excuse me, I'm sorry. So, it's sort of a horrible agreement that we're going to agree to. And just because we need to get this in place and then continue the process, we're not going to give up.
Thank you. I will, at this point, open up this discussion to the public. I see our library representative, Ms. Conchillian, if you want to step up and give some comments.
Want my name and address again? No?
Go ahead.
Yeah, reluctant would be a really good phrase.
Linda? Yes, I
Linda
think you-
Conchillian,
there you go.
1978 Adams Street, Yountville. I have a couple of questions. First, what we have been bringing up at the commission is trying to be very creative in ways to look at where and how to get some hours. So we have asked about the 2-person staff that always needs to be there. We were told it's because of a double exposure law about, or policy about having monies change hands for fines. So the commissioner from Calistoga and myself challenged the library director, who has created her own ad hoc committee, to look into whether all fines could be handled at Napa City Library, in which case no monies would change hands here, in which case we wouldn't necessarily need to have 2 people. Really trying to challenge them to think outside the box, to come up with a solution for some of the smaller branches that are struggling with hours and how to manage it. So, because if we could have one person and not cut anybody's staff hours, the total number of hours, limiting it to 1 at each time it's open, would give us 5 days a week, 6 days a week, as opposed to the current 3. So whether they would mail in their fines or have to go to Napa, we're just trying to get them to think about ways to look at that. The other thing we've asked them to do, since this is a circulation-based budget of hours, is our branch does a lot of, have a lot of patrons that use the computers. That's not factored into circulation. So we've asked if we can capture how much time is spent on the computers and have that be considered to the circulation base model. I have a question about the 2 hours that would start hopefully April 1st. And you said it would go to Saturdays. That was already determined by?
I'll get staff to answer that question once.
Okay.
Once we're done.
And who will be determining which end of the hours on Saturday that would go to? If it's earlier in the morning, staying later in the afternoon, whatever. On the capital funds that would have to go back to the county and you want to use it, does that include things like making the front door access to a wheelchair and also working on the lighting? Would that come out of those capital funds?
Linda, staff will answer these questions when we're done with public comment.
Okay. And I guess the main thing, since we are reluctantly agreeing to this, at least for the 4 months till June, is there any way that if we go forward with a no-cost lease agreement, that we get in writing that at least for the next year, that our hours don't change, since we're giving them a no-cost lease, if they would at least agree that our hours wouldn't change. For the negative, it could only increase if one of these other solutions comes through. Is that a possibility?
Okay.
Okay. Any questions?
Any questions for our library board commissioner? Thank you very much for your comments and the time you spend on this. It's been very helpful. Who else would like to comment? Mr. Warren, please state your name again for the record.
My name is Ed Warren. I live at the Veterans Home. Since I have used the local library frequently and live at the home, I've had in my mind a question, and I just want to raise the question because I don't have any answer for it, which is whether or not counting what we do up on the hill in our library would be helpful to the library here in town. For example, I know that we request books that go through the county system. And since use is one of the issues here, there may be some way in which those things might be beneficial. Now, I don't really have an answer to any of this, but I just want to raise that question, whether or not there's any way in which activity up in the home's library, which is entirely paid for by the home, but does in fact use facilities and pieces of the broader library system might somehow help us.
Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Anyone else? I see no further individuals wanting to make public comments. Let's go through some of the questions that were asked. Ms. Quintillion asked about the hours on Saturday and when they would occur.
If you could, I'd like to back up to a few of the earlier comments and questions, because Ms. Quintillion talked about what the county refers to as double custody and their use of volunteers, and that is something that the council ad hoc committees and staff have also been very diligent on trying to encourage the county to reevaluate those. So we appreciate the commission's follow-up, because we also think that when I mentioned those changes in the county staffing policies created a double whammy. That added a lot of cost without necessarily on our benefit or perceived benefit. So we continue to do that, and our understanding, what's been conveyed to us, although it baffles us, is that they have union restrictions and limitations on the use of volunteers, because we see that as a potential. So I think those are a few areas that we want to continue to work on and have also questioned publicly in our meetings. A couple things on the question on hours. The initial determination on hours, I do want to point out that the Napa City County Library operates the system, so all the operating decisions, staffing, those are really the determination of the system. They have indicated that they are prepared to move forward with opening the library 2 hours earlier on Saturday is their recommendation from what the library director has determined. Certainly something that would come back and be addressed through the Library Ad Hoc Committee and other community input would be if there was a broader discussion on what might we do with some additional hours, and might we restructure our current hours. I think that would be a different dialogue. The library director has indicated to me that she'd be very receptive to that. But one of the things that the ad hoc committee really wanted was if we are prepared to do this and we're going to do this, we want to see an immediate turnaround, and we don't want to see our hours languish and come up with some reason for why it doesn't happen until July 1, and then somebody tells us it's only an hour. Library director also indicated that her preliminary review of the existing CAM indicates that there'll be no change in the base hours. So our 2 hours, again, this is in a preliminary conversation with her, I don't have it in a written document, would be that that 2 hour base would continue for the next fiscal year. So with regard to the issue of wheelchair access and lighting, I'm going to have to answer with a classic attorney answer, which it depends. And the reason I say that is capital system replacement is exactly that. And if it's an enhancement of something that didn't exist, so without knowing more, and that's something we may be able to work with the county, but I also will point out that the, it's an 18.84% cost share, meaning the counties. So, for example, if the library wants to do something different with its lighting than what they did, because the lighting reflects what they signed off on their design, I don't know that we are signing up for the other 82% of the cost. So I would say what we probably need to do is have a different conversation, and if the county was willing to allow that fund to be used and the council agreed, it may be something. I do know that while some of our residents, the door is actually handicap accessible, meets all the ADA standards. There's one 15 feet to the left that has the push button, but some of our folks just simply don't like going down and coming through that one. But, I mean, those are both legitimate items that we can look at, but they may or may not be eligible as the question was put together.
Steve, can I ask a clarifying question on that 18%? If the lights had to be replaced in the library, is the town required to pay 82% of the cost?
Again, it would depend on what the nature, I mean, without knowing the specifics, because when we talk about capital replacement, we're really talking about the, the infrastructure, the HVAC, the electrical photovoltaic system, and some, the fixtures there probably will be on the town, and that would be a legitimate one. And again, I don't know what the lighting issue is that's being discussed. That's news to me.
I guess my question really is whether the town's not on the hook for 82% of what happens in the library, but obviously if the basketball goal doesn't work, the library's not.
Correct, and that's why that formula is identified. There are certain things that the library is not responsible for at all. For example, the basketball goal, we wouldn't be responsible for any of the interior, even though we provided it initially, a lot of the fixtures and stuff. If the library did something and needs something or wants something different, they would be expected to deal with that on their own. The light fixtures, if there was something that failed or something, probably is going to come back to the overall maintenance of the facility. So that's why, without having exact information, be able to look at,
Okay. Other questions? One that came up, I had been under the impression that each login in the library was counted as a item. Is that correct? Do you know?
I don't know. We've always been under the impression that, what's been conveyed to us was that the computer use is factored somehow. So, I mean, that's what's been conveyed to us in conversations. Again,
No one knows the answer to that question that I've talked to.
So, I mean, those are certainly some things that we can continue to, as we work with them, with the ad hoc committee, continue to ask for refinement and understanding. But I'm not here, I'm not comfortable at all telling you that I know exactly how each transaction and each, if somebody comes to story hour, does that count as an activity? Is that recorded? I honestly don't know. I don't know how the library staff is treating that. We were given the distinct impression that the computer use was being tracked and monitored somehow. So that's the extent that I feel comfortable answering you that question.
And one other question I have down here was brought up by Mr. Warren about if there's any way the library up the hill can help the Yountville Library. The situation that you brought up, and you can correct me if I'm incorrect, there's a state of California system about checking out interlibrary loans, so that is counted separately. So my suggestion would be is to make your request directly through the Yountville Library, then that would be counted as circulation. That's one way I can think. I don't know if there's anything to add.
No, that would be correct. The Veterans Home Library is included in what's called SNAP, the Solano Napa Area Partnership and Book. So you're absolutely correct. If it's to count and help the local Yountville Library, the transaction needs to be booked in and out of the library, unless there was some understanding reached that's not been reached as to how the Veterans Home may or may not be counted. But that could be another, again, part of the conversation that the ad hoc committee could have. So I think that we can add that to our portfolio of things to further try to understand.
And if I can follow up with one last question, just to back up, you referred to the double custody issue on money. I would consider myself a little frustrated because at first it was a privacy issue, and then it was a breaks issue. Now there's laws about double custody of money. I mean, am I correct in sensing that there's sort of a different reason, I feel like, every time? Is there a legal restriction? Is that a county policy?
It's a union issue.
On double custody?
The union issue that there be two librarians on staff when the library is open.
For money purposes specifically, or not really?
We don't, I mean, I would say that's a frustration level, and we've heard different variations, and I simply point to the fact that it doesn't seem to have been that way for the last 3.5 years. I do understand the double custody issue. I think the county, their staffing standards, and that's why I say, they operate the system, and if they have a policy in place regarding their staffing, we certainly need to add our concerns about the staffing, and I do want to echo, I'm very pleased to hear that commission members are providing input that supports what the ad hoc committee has been doing, because we think those interpretation of policy that have not been implemented before have a negative impact on, as does really what we found, I won't say shocking, but it found to me that they just really weren't interested at all in considering volunteers or other approaches to help identify the staffing. So I think we need to continue to work with the county on helping them to reevaluate those policies given the economic front.
Is there any further questions of staff?
I have a question, and that is if the lighting fixtures, if there are complaints from the public about the lighting fixtures, should they be directed to the county or through the town?
I would say if anybody has an initial concern about the library, it starts with the library. I mean, like I say, we're having a very nebulous conversation about lighting, so it's very hard to give anybody an honest answer. I mean, if a light fixture broke or something, then as a owner of the building, it's the town's responsibility to fix and replace the light. So from that standpoint, that's how we would respond as, the person that owns and takes care of the building. Just like if a window was broken, we would replace the window. But I don't know what this nefarious lighting issue is.
And my other question is, this is a long-term lease, and yet we only have the assurance of those 2 hours for 3 months.
Let me tie back to two things. It is a long-term lease, and it ties into the lease use agreement that the town entered into in consideration for the $250,000 contribution. So that has a 20-year where we allow for space. The no cost gets factored in every year, and that's why it's being footnoted as worth an equivalent of 2 years. The concern would be that in year 2025, that factor may not deliver the equivalent of 2 hours. That's where the county was coming from, but other factors in that whole formula will go into play. So, I mean, that's why, we did, as you recall, we talked about trying to get a footnote that said, we will get 2 hours more than the CAM delivers. And, we tried very hard on a few things to get that, and the county would not agree to that. Those were discussions that the ad hoc committee had. So, but it is footnoted. It's one of the cost factors that goes into the allocation model, but not the only one.
Thank you.
Do you have any additional comments you want to make at this time?
It's with a heavy heart that I support this.
Councilor Mueller?
I think an obvious question is, based on information we don't even understand, we've always been charging them rent, the equivalent to about $1,000 a month. You can't even rent an apartment in Yountville for $1,000 a month, so it seems very cheap. So one obvious thing is, look, let's just raise the rent, we'll get more hours. The problem there, as long as they have the circulation-based CAM in place, is that that's going to get figured into the bottom line. So if we charge a lot of rent, we're not going to get as many hours. So we're really just kind of shooting ourselves in the foot by doing that. So that's not going to work, because you wonder, well, 20 years out, $1,000, well, that's not going to work. I think another issue, which the wording is implied in this contract, but it's not certainly, in my opinion, totally tied to it. If someday we can hopefully get them to throw out the circulation-based CAM, which really is detrimental to Yountville, I can't say right now, without looking at a lot of the other models, which one would be better, if there is one better, but this one certainly is not very good. What would happen 15 years down the line or 5 years down the line if they threw that model out and picked another one? Because these 2 hours we're getting now in exchange for not charging them any rent is based on this circulation-based CAM. So if we don't have that anymore, what does that mean? And I don't really have an answer, but I think that's a good question. But, the 2 hours is one thing. But the real issue here, by moving ahead with this contract, is that we've documented in writing that we're going to get this money that's actually set aside in the circulation-based CAM, for infrastructure that goes based on the formula, and it documents that we will get it. It's already in the formula. We're already going to get it. They're already saying, even if we wanted to replace the lighting now, we could. They don't really probably have this money right now. They're spending it at other libraries because they're already saying that Yountville's brand new, is probably not going to need anything for 5 years. So start drawing down the money, in a couple months probably isn't really a reality. If you only need a little bit, they can probably come up with that. So those are some of the things that I think everybody really needs to kind of think about when you have your decision about whether we really should approve this. Is the language clear enough about the future rent if we don't have the CAM? Is having this about $30,000 in writing now, is that critical enough for us to agree to sign this? So I think those are the real issues that we have, to talk about.
To that point, we have included by reference the CAM, and what that also means is if the CAM goes away, then this whole thing would be subject to renegotiation, because they would have to replicate the formulas, and we've done that deliberately in that sense, as Councilmember Mulder has alluded to.
Councilor Hall? That's an interesting statement you just made. Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, I really don't have any further questions, other than as experienced as we are in running a library in this community, I'm just amazed that, we're down to 16, 17 and a half hours, and, we're stuck with trying to reconsider getting an additional 2 hours. I mean, the community has asked us to do more than that, and I understand the reluctance behind all the work that we've done here. I'm just baffled. I mean, this cannot be that complicated. But I guess in a bureaucracy, it just does get muddled up, and there's too many interested parties or maybe disinterested parties in Yountville to work with us on options like volunteer or otherwise, or having one individual run the library. And it's just, again, it's frustrating listening to the entire discourse because I would like to use the library more. It's just not open. But I don't really have any other comment at this point in time.
Thank you. Let me ask a question about your last comment, because if I'm looking through this lease, item 15B gives the county a option to terminate for convenience. So for whatever reason they so desire within 1 year, I don't see a termination for convenience for the town of Yountville over this 20-year. And Councilor Moeller brought up my number one concern, which has to do with, I understand that the less cost that is incurred by the Yountville Library, the cheaper it is per hour for us to, A, buy additional hours, and B, for us to get more hours. However, if they went to a, let's say, population-based model, then this would just be thrown out the window completely. So
May I address that?
is this,
If you
I
turn-
didn't realize
if
that
you
this
turn-
had that.
No.
Could you highlight where that clause is?
If you turn to page 6 of the agreement, there's actually under 15, cancellation and termination. There's also a clause B, termination for cause by town. And number 3 is failure to observe and perform any material provision of this agreement. So if they wholesale change a provision, and I would argue, the fundamental CAM model without our mutual consent is going to be a material change in the provision of how it's calculated. So that would give us cause for canceling. But again, I think one needs to realize what we're talking about. That means you're canceling the lease to have the library, which then means the library has no place to go, which is counterproductive to the goal of having an open library.
Well, maybe, Arnold, you could address this as well. I mean, termination of the lease could also mean termination to renegotiate. Secondly, you made the comment, Steve, that you could argue that the CAM model is part of this. Do you believe that language, Arnold, is strong enough in here to make that clear?
Well, the county has taken a position, I believe, and Steve can correct me if I'm wrong, that they are, this is the language they wanted to see in the agreement. Certainly, as it goes forward, if we felt that they were not living up to their end of the bargain, we could take action to terminate, and then have a dispute over that. A material provision of the agreement doesn't, I would argue, does include the issue that has been raised, and we would hang our hat on that section.
And by reference, I want to point out, Exhibit C is the whole CAM model, including the initial allocation and footnoting. So to me, that's a very significant inclusion in the lease document, because, there's decisions in there, and that's why we worked hard to make sure there was reference to initial CAM allocation, so it ties back. And you'll also note that the Exhibit C goes in, and it also talks about the capital fund designation allegation to source. So to me, that's an important element that's included in there. And that's marked, it's under library financial plan, and it's approximately 20 pages long.
So, Arnold, I see in the definitions it refers to the CAM. We have the library financial plan is described in Exhibit C. I mean, it's not as strong as item 3, term. It's for 20 years, right? It doesn't specifically say if the CAM goes away, this is subject to renegotiation.
Right, and what would happen if you go to page 7, There is the language that says if we feel that there is a breach by the county, we'd have to give them notice what we feel is the breach, and they'd have either the right to cure that breach or provide us their response. So certainly it would, if we felt that they were not living up under the provisions of the CAM, we'd have to give them notice, and that would open the dialogue. Ultimately, if we took the position that that's sufficient grounds for the breach, we would enforce it.
What do we win? Go ahead and give me your, it depends.
No, well, no one can guarantee victory, but I would say that this is a substantial provision of the agreement. And as such, it is one of the fundamental financial elements and components to this lease. And as such, I think it would be material, and if it is material, then we have a right to terminate the lease based upon a breach of the material term of this lease.
Great. Okay. Any additional items of discussion on this? I would just make the comment that I too agree that at this point, I don't think we're finished. And I say we as the town, and I say we as also simply citizens of the county of Napa and users of the library. What's probably most frustrating to me is that the library is there to be open for its citizens, and I really find it odd to be arguing, I feel like, against the library system, trying to get them to have their own libraries open more, and they want to give reasons for why they're not open more. Fundamentally, it's odd to me. So I think that the good thing about the cost allocation model is it has highlighted, it's brought a lot of clarity to how the county city library system is funded and operated and where the different costs are going. And hopefully not only this council, but American Canyon and Napa and the county will look with a much more stringent eye than we have in the past about how the system is being run and how that affects the ability for our citizens to use it. So I had that one primary concern has to do with what if the model changed, but I'm pretty sure that's not going to happen in the near future with all the pain that has gone through on that. So I would as well reluctantly support this lease and believe that it will be positive to get a few more hours, but Saturday morning sounds good to me, and that we should look within our next budget to get an idea of can we add, we had talked about even adding 2 hours, might be able to take those 2 hours and move them to, say, Thursday or something like that to have an additional day. I think that would be very positive.
And I will point out that the county library staff has indicated and continues to indicate a willingness to do so as if those environment changes.
Does anybody want to make a motion?
I'd like to reluctantly move that, let me get to the motion here.
Page 3 of the...
Third page. Almost the motion here.
That would be to adopt the resolution and approve the agreement, the lease agreement.
Please?
That would be to adopt resolution number
Got it.
2952-11.
Right. I
And
reluctantly
approve the
move to approve a resolution, like to go that on the records. Number 2952-11, approving a long-term lease between the town and the county of Napa for town-owned space in the community center located at 6516 Washington Street for use by the Napa City County Library, Yountville Station Library.
I'll second.
All in favor? I hear none opposed. That resolution passes unanimously. I do want to thank the subcommittee members for the time they have spent on this issue. Most certainly, town staff, Steve Rogers particularly, has spent a tremendous amount of time. Thank you, Ms. Kachilian, for your efforts. At times they're frustrating but important. And I do want to say I think we've maybe been a little bit too hard on the library system at times tonight, but they have worked with us. They have looked for ways to do this. They didn't have to do this, so I think it's positive that we can get something sooner rather than later. So let's try to keep moving forward. All right, let's move on to item number 10B. Few things more exciting than talking about other post employee retirement benefits. Can I have a staff report?
Yes, thank you, Vice Mayor, Council. This item is before you for consideration for establishment of an OPEB trust fund. And as the Vice Mayor pointed out, OPEB is just an acronym for Other Post-Employment Benefits, which for the town is synonymous with retiree health benefits, that being the one benefit we do offer as a post-employment benefit. The town adopted the state's vesting requirements in June 30, 2009, and that vesting schedule can be found in the packet. It's part of Attachment 3, and it shows that the benefit is phased in after 10 years of PERS service at 50%, and to qualify for a full benefit, employees must retire from the town with 20 years of PERS service. The Town Council has committed funding for OPEB through an allocation charged based on salaries, and we started off in 2008-9 with a percentage of 3.75, and we've implemented increases each year. And for this fiscal year, we're at 6%, and for 2011-12, that rate will be 7%. And we're building up our OPEB reserves through that method. Also, in June 2009, Town Council allocated $350,000 of funding from the Kern NBA water rights sale for the OPEB reserve. So at the end of the current fiscal year, 2010-11, we will have approximately $550,000 in our OPEB reserves. The reporting and accounting requirements for OPEB have changed recently, and in 2009-10, the town was required to implement GASB 45. And GASB 45 really requires additional accounting and reporting for this liability. Instead of going along with what we refer to as a pay-as-you-go accounting method, just paying out what we owe for the year and accounting for it in that way, which is very common for government agencies before GASB made these new rules, we had to record the liability for future benefits, and we had to have that liability calculated by an actuary. So we went through that process of having an actuarial study. The town had previously contracted with Bartel Associates, and we invited them back to update that study, which they did. And the results are also attached to this report for your information. Those results were compiled into a disclosure in our financial statements, and we had a footnote in our CAFR that showed what our accrued liability was for our benefit program. Because our current funds are not in a restricted trust fund, they're considered pay-as-you-go funds, and therefore we were not able to show them as dedicated funding in our financial statements. So at that time, we recommended to Council that we consider and research the options for establishing an irrevocable trust, and that's what this item before you tonight is doing. So in looking at the options for establishing an irrevocable trust, the town manager and I looked at who is actually providing these services. And obviously with the implementation of the new GASB rules, a lot of agencies are now offering this service. But we quickly decided there were two main players to consider that would meet the town's needs and offer the best program. And so we narrowed it down and we focused on two options. And the first one we looked at was the California Employers Retiree Benefit Trust Fund, which is nicknamed CERBIT. And that's been established by CalPERS. It was established in 2007. There's 284 public agencies currently enrolled in the program. They have $1.5 billion in assets. They do not offer individual participants investment choices. Once you're in, and they invest the monies as they see fit to earn their target rate. And as a pooled fund, since they are so large, they require each participant to get an actuarial valuation every 2 years. And since we're a smaller agency, we're actually only required by GASB to get an actuarial valuation every 3 years. So that was one of our considerations. So we also looked at the PARS program, and that's the Public Agency Retirement Services Company. And PARS is one of the few industry providers of retirement and other post-employment benefits that works solely with public sector clients. They have over 28 years of experience. They currently have 560 agencies enrolled in their programs and $958 million in assets. They have a governing board comprised of 5 members, and they operate as a privately held corporation. They offer a turnkey program which includes trust administration and consulting and coordination of the actuarial studies. They partner with Union Bank for trustee services and Highmark Capital Management for the investment management services. They are an IRS-compliant Section 115 trust, and they only require an actuarial study every 3 years, as GASB does for us. So after considering these two options, we are recommending that we enter into an agreement with PARS to establish the town's irrevocable trust fund. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions. And I'd also like to mention that Mitch Barker, Executive Vice President from PARS, is also here to answer questions about the program.
Does the council have any questions of staff at this point?
I do have a question, and that is in looking at the difference between the two. I am wondering, can individuals actually choose their own investment in the PARS program? Because you said that that was a consideration because they couldn't under the CERBIT.
Yes, under PARS, we can pick an investment strategy, and we can even, if we want to, as town staff, we can get down to which investments we'd like to park the money in.
I want to clarify, I think council member's question is not the individuals choose, the town chooses its investment strategy, whereas PERS is a one-size-fits-all. PARS offers flexibility, and you'll note in the resolution that staff actually has a recommended initial investment strategy.
And my other question is, in looking at the difference in the program fees, the program fees are at least double for PARS rather than the CERBIT. Is that, am I reading that correctly? I don't want to make sure because I'm not an accountant, but in reading this, that's what I see.
It looks like it's 25 basis points for PARS and another 25 basis points for Union Bank Highmark. Is that correct?
35.
Well, no, it's because I think it gets waived. You get something
It
waived.
can get waived if you're investing in their Highmark funds.
So it's 50 basis points is the cost structure, roughly double what the CalPERS is, and 50 basis points just for, I'm not a financial advisor, but for a benchmark, that's usually what a low or a no-cost fund, mutual fund would have, that kind of management fee or less. Is that correct? Well, you can buy ETFs, and those are different. So are you
Any
finished?
questions?
No, no.
Further?
So I see you're recommending PARS, and I'm glad you have an individual here so they can
Yes.
maybe do a
Answer
quick
some
introduction,
questions.
that kind of stuff. When you went through I think your comment was you quickly ruled out all the others. Can you tell me why you quickly ruled out the others? And I, not having any experience in these kinds of managed accounts, other than what little I know about CalPERS.
I don't want to say we quickly ruled them out, but a lot of the programs that are offered require more, would be for a larger agency if you had an in-house full-time treasurer to manage the portfolio. A lot of those programs would make some sense. We don't really have that level of staffing here, so we really were looking for more of a turnkey, comprehensive program.
Fair enough. And I recall that you said the fund balance at the end of this plan year, this fiscal year, is going to be roughly $500,000. But
Yes.
our total fund requirements, if we were to be 100% covered, is $1 million and change. Is that 2.2? Oh, I'm sorry, 2.2. Is that 25% of where we're at?
It's about 25%, yes, which is a nice down payment.
Yeah, it's a good start. Okay, I'll save any other questions.
Councilor Mueller, any questions at this point? I have one question. Do you know how much the annual or the, I guess, a biannual actuarial audit would be? What's each audit cost when we do that actuarial study?
It does vary. I know there's a new program where you can do, it's like, I want to say, a slimmed-down version of an actuarial, which can save the town some money. So we're looking at that, and PARS has advised us that that's something that they've coordinated for other clients. So, because an actuarial study can run about $10,000 to $12,000 even for a town our size, and this has the potential to save us several $1,000s.
Okay. So there's the management fees, but there's also the cost of having to do 2 years versus 3-year cycle.
Yes.
50% increase
Yes.
in that case. Okay. With that, I will open up the public hearing. Sir, would you like to come up and make any comments? Sure. If you could state your name for the record.
Vice Mayor, members of the council, I'm Mitch Barker, Executive Vice President with PARS. Our office is down in Orange County, next to John Wayne Airport. Glad to be here. We've been in this business for 15 years, OPEB Trust Administration, which is kind of interesting because GASB 45 just came out in 2004. Turns out a school district in Southern California came to us in 94 and said we want to set up a trust and pre-fund post-employment benefits. And our question was, why? There's no requirement. And they said, well, there is on the private sector side called FASB 106. And sure enough, we did our research and they were right. And we said, okay, are you sure? And they said, yep, because we think something's coming someday for public agencies. They were clearly 8 years ahead of their time. So they were already a client, and we chose a partner, Union Bank, to be our trustee and our investment manager, and we've been in business ever since. So obviously when GASB 45 came out in 2004, the public sector side really ramped up on this whole thing. And 7 years later, we've got a lot of clients. We think we've got the right model for you. We've got agencies as small as 5 participants in it. And recently, 2 months ago, we're very proud to say that Contra Costa County chose our program too. And they invested $51 million. So the key is fees are important, but the difference primarily between us and CalPERS is we are a full-service company. We are going to come to your site. We're going to bring our investment manager, the actual senior portfolio manager that's going to manage your money, and sit down and work through what's the right investment strategy for the town. We think that's important. You're going to have a cell phone number, and you'll be able to find him when you have questions on the market. Additional things is we have an IRS-approved trust. Our major competitor, it's not IRS-approved. We think that's important. The key point about actuarial study, 2 years versus every 3 years, I think that's important. Since we're a private entity, we can offer you that GASB 45 capability. So that's going to save you money over time. Also, local control, we think that's important. Your only input may be 775 in the actuarial evaluation. That's all we want to give you on input. We don't have the time or the expertise. That's fine. Andrew Brown will take that and run with it and build a portfolio. Other agencies want to provide some input, whether it's on the risk tolerance level or it's just investment strategy in general. So we'll take that input to the level you want to give it, and then we'll build an investment strategy for the town. He also writes an investment policy statement. I think that's important. It'll actually be a black and white document that will say, how am I going to invest your money safely? What are the ranges on stocks, bonds, and cash? What are the things I can invest in? And also, what are the things we cannot invest in, such as no precious metals, no hedge funds, no derivatives, no raw land. That's all in a black and white document that Andrew Brown will produce at the right time. So I think the other key things are actuarial coordination, which Kathleen mentioned. We think that's a way of reducing the administrative burden on the staff. It takes time to do that. We coordinate with the actuary. If you said the next time you need it done, go out and get 3 bids for us. We'll also do that. It's kind of like doing an RFP for you. We don't have any formal arrangement with any actuaries. We just know who the good ones are, and we'll go get those quotes, and then it's up to the town to make a decision on which actuary they want to go with. One of the small agency benefits for GASB 45, when you're under 100 plan members, which you are, is you may get this less expensive version of the study done called an AMM, Alternative Measurement Method. It only costs $1,500 versus $10,000. So this is a great study. I'm not sure it's necessary every time going forward. The alternative measurement method will still have the key statistics you need in the future. So $1,500 versus $10,000, that's worth considering. And then the other benefit being if you're under 200 plan members, you may get the study done every 3 years versus every 2 years. So that's another way to save cost. And finally, if you were to choose us, but for some reason down the road our plan no longer became the one of choice, we simply have a 90-day termination clause. And for no termination fees, we'll do a trust-to-trust transfer to whatever other provider you choose. We think that safety net, it makes it easy for folks to choose us. Hopefully our service and our performance is going to make it tough for you to leave. But legally, it's easy to leave. Versus our major competitor, if you make a commitment to them, it's a 3-year minimum stay. So collectively, those are the things I think that are important in the GASB 45 OPEB trust process.
Thank you, Mr. Barker. Anybody have any questions?
I'm sorry, I do. Excuse me. In this climate and financial climate, I was wondering about Union Bank, and have they received any funds from the federal government?
Good question. Fortunately, they didn't participate in the subprime home loan business. Therefore, they didn't need any TARP funds, and they've stayed out of the negative news. They've actually grown in size with all the failures of banks or merging of banks. So they're in the top 25 now in the nation. They're the second largest trust division in the state, so it's a very important part of their business.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming tonight. Just a quick question or two. So you said Contra Costa County. Can you give maybe a couple other clients? I'm sure you guys you took references, but just maybe for the council. They're probably in here.
Sure. In fact, your handout has got a list of...
This is specifically your handout? Okay.
No, your staff report, the one that Kathleen put together.
But there's a PARS, the attachment 5, is that got...
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, sir. There's a page that says municipal clients and GASB agencies. Looks like this. I'll see that one.
Yes, I found it.
Okay. So some of the ones that come to mind in the area, city of Santa Clara in the Bay Area. Sonoma County is also a client. We have a number of special districts, Central, Contra Costa Sanitary District, also the Transit Authority down below, East Bay Regional Park District, Metropolitan Transportation Commission. They're an interesting study. They actually started out with CalPERS, and because of the volatility of the investment and the fact they wanted a more conservative investment choice, they actually removed their money. It took them about 6 months to do that, but they eventually shifted over to PARS, and they chose a very conservative investment strategy. Superior Court of California, Sonoma County, is another special district that has adopted our plan, and West County Wastewater. So it's a combination of cities, counties, and special districts.
And so just making sure I understand the math on this, it's roughly 50 basis points on our total asset value, which at this point in time would be just over $500,000 at the end of this fiscal year. Is that correct, Kathleen?
Yeah.
So you're talking about $2,700 a year?
The PARS portion, which is for the trust administration and the ongoing, we do have a monthly minimum of $400 a month.
Okay, so you're really talking about $4,800. So we're not going to hit that monthly minimum for $1 million until we get to around $1 million.
Correct. Be about 2+ years.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Steve or Kathleen, did you guys have a chance to talk to any of the other municipalities and about their experience or other organizations like ours? Okay. And that's why you're making this recommendation, obviously.
I think there's really two different philosophies, and if you go with PERS, you basically are choosing not to be involved in the management and direction, and that's troubling, especially in this particular case when you notice staff's looking at a 6%, we're looking at a more medium conservative, and PERS is talking about perhaps doing that. So, while it may have a little bit more increased cost, the fact that they actually meet with you, work with you, and counsel and work to develop the program. Kathleen said something earlier that I think is really important. We have a small, lean staff. We need a turnkey program that has strong management in their organization that knows what they're doing and can provide guidance and counsel to the town. Kathleen certainly has the capacity to do this, but to do it on a regular basis and daily, I'll lose a lot of other productivity for what we're attempting to do. So, you talked about there was a few other, we talked with some cities that evaluated. There were some that looked at kind of doing it their own. International City County Management Association has a small division that operates this, but really when we felt who in the area is going to provide us a good quality program, good references, and when we talk to the folks, generally the people have a relationship with PARS and they have a trust with PERS.
Fair enough.
And I think for our purposes, we felt having a relationship and managing the trust rather than just being a small entity. And that's not to say that at the end of the day, the PERS trust meets the minimum obligation and the minimum objective that the council has established for the town to move forward. We just think that PARS is a better fit for our organization and where we think the council would like us to be more involved in managing that asset.
I have one last question.
Let me add one more additional thought if I can. I think also fees are very important, but also I think performance is important. In performance, less fees equals net performance. In over 1 year and 3 years, we've outperformed the CalPERS Trust. And even when you subtract out the fee differential, our net performance is still better than theirs. We're very proud of that.
So you mentioned that should we decide to take this trust and move it elsewhere, we give 90 days and we have that option. I'm assuming your other clients have that same option. Can you tell me, have other clients ever moved their trust?
Fortunately, none of our 80-plus OPEB trust clients have left in 15 years. So
Okay, thank you.
that's a key point I'm always supposed to bring up, and I forgot that.
That's why I
So,
asked.
there you go. Thank you.
Thank
Nobody's left yet.
I'd also suggest you pay Mr. Rogers royalty for that tagline he just developed for you. That was pretty good. Any further questions? Thank you, Mr. Barker.
Thank you.
Is there anyone else from the public who would like to comment on this issue? Anyone? Seeing none, I will close public comment, bring it back for further discussion and/or action. Any comments to make?
I
Councilor
have
Mueller?
Some comments. I'm going to start with a little historical perspective. I've been very involved in managing large sums of money for organizations, and I've been down this road. And what the road means is having a bank, taking out a bunch of fees, that have financial advisors. It's just really, in my experience, has never worked out well. I think that there are other options out there that I would really like for us to consider. I don't really think, CalPERS, I totally trust the staff. I think that we've all read enough about that might not be one of them. But I would really like to see some of the other ones, I think we've all been down the road where we've seen these bank fees, bank charges, there's no cost, but there really is a cost. These things, they're just still not as transparent as they really need to be. So I still have, I have no concern that we need to open this OPEB trust fund. I think that's very important. How this important money is managed in that trust fund. This is, our employees' retirement medical. It's very critical money. We may not have a lot, but it's really important to us for this benefit for our employees. So I would really like to see a little more evaluation. I realize that they do this for a lot of other agencies, but, there's lots of other avenues. Basically, it's like having our own retirement money, and how do we really manage that? And, I would like for us, I know that staff really wants to put very minimal time into that, and I can understand that, but I think there might be some other options out there. I also have a concern if, I think staff is recommending moderately conservative. I'm just more conservative with my money. I hate to lose it, and I think that this money is very critical. So I don't think I'd be quite that aggressive myself. I think not losing it and making sure it's there, especially in these economic times, dumping it all in there and having it maybe be managed a little more aggressive. I just don't think it's appropriate right now for these times. And, I think that since to me this is very critical money, I think that, annually, periodically, however frequently, whatever we go with, whatever we decide, I would like to see, get some council input. It's always better to have, the town manager and 5 council members, 6 people really looking at how much money did we make annually, did it go up or down, how to divide it up. So I think it's always better to have it come back to the council with the town manager's opinion, so it doesn't rest on one person's shoulder, or at least an ad hoc committee of, some people to really see how it's going every year. So those are my thoughts.
Thank you for your comments. Councilor Hall, would you like to comment?
Yeah, I'm going to ask Councilmember Mueller a question. So, what I'm hearing you say, and I don't want to paraphrase or put words in your mouth, but I'm hearing you say that you believe there are other options that maybe we should explore. So, can you give me an example? I know we talked a little bit before, but I want to make sure I understand, because one thing that a managed plan or an asset manager is going to do that the rest of us, myself included, and I trust our staff who's busy doing other work, doesn't have time to do, is sit there and manage an investment portfolio. That's not what their responsibility to the town is. Their responsibility is to perform the duties and actions that we want them, on our and for the town's benefit.
Yeah, I'm not saying that we are going to manage that money at all. I'm just saying, for example, you could hire a financial advisor. We basically have a trust that we're putting the money into, and the financial advisor on an hourly basis, for example, could work with the staff and decide, where it could go. You pay them an hourly fee. You don't have financial advisors taking cuts. You don't have banks taking cuts. It's worth exploring. That would be one example. There's other ways to do that as well. Okay. So that would be one example.
I just want to make sure I understood. So I think I understand now. These retirement monies are critical, as we know. We're only going to have 25% of what's going to be required ultimately at some point in time funded at the outset, and obviously we would trust that would grow with the leadership of whatever direction we went. I think that these are obviously uncertain times, and we've experienced that even in the last 48 hours. So I won't go into that in any depth, but I think a trusted financial advisor and one that has got experience with these kinds of vehicles or these kinds of assets is important to engage. My experience has been that usually when you're spending money, you're getting good advice, or at least you're getting the advice, and if they come recommended and referenced, then usually that's not inappropriate. I don't know necessarily that I would agree or disagree on the direction of moderately conservative. I'm not exactly sure. If you do your points and how you identify what that means, it means something probably different to every person. Maybe there's a band or a range of how those assets are managed or what they're invested in that specify what it is that defines moderately conservative. But these plans are important, and it's important to get these assets into a place where not only are they going to move up onto the balance sheet rather than as a footnote, but as a asset that we can identify. We know we still have an unfunded liability of about 3/4 of that remaining amount, but having that portion set aside, given that we wouldn't have to come up with all of that at one point in time, I think would be important to the town in general. So I'll leave it at that. I appreciate your comments, Margie, Councilmember Moeller, because I think they're important. And certainly, I trust the staff at Steve's direction and certainly with the group that we've had come at least be here tonight, and with your recommendation that they've got a package that's put together that looks.
I do think there is one piece that I don't want to overgloss, and it may be a subtlety to a lot of folks, but one of the important considerations is that we need our fiduciary agent to be an IRS compliant Section 115 trust, and a lot of individual financial advisors or managers don't meet that certification. So that was one of the criterion that the town staff is evaluating when we look at it, and it does take out a whole category of financial service folks because they don't meet that criterion.
Thank you for that clarification. Councilwoman Dornbecker?
I think I agree with Councilmember Moeller that this is a very important step because we need to protect this money. And I know in the financial climate today, there's a great deal of trepidation on my part about trusting anybody with our money. I think that I believe that our staff is very competent about issues, and I believe that if this is the decision that you have made because you have done the interviewing and made the considerations, that I'm willing to take that on faith that you know what you're doing. I'm not an accountant nor a financial advisor, but it's a very important decision, and I don't want you to be making a mistake. That's all.
If I may, there is one dialogue following up. I do think adding a potential clause, establishing an ad hoc council committee to work with staff on the implementation and some of the nuances, staff certainly would appreciate and that. And if that is the input, because that is helpful. And we've used the ad hoc committee on a number of tasks and assignments, and there's certainly an opportunity to do so. And if that was the council's preference, I would suggest that we slightly modify the resolution to add a new number 3, which would be to establish a council OPEB ad hoc committee to work with staff and trust administration related to policy decisions, revision of policy, and performance review.
Is that suggestion to be an ongoing committee? Or is that an initial startup?
I think, I'm prepared. I'm using it as an ad hoc because I do think it could be a standing committee. We don't really have a lot of identified standing committees, and if we get our initial programs and review, and then it may meet annually to review that performance, I think Councilmember Moeller has a good point that the council should be involved in understanding how that program is managed and what the results are, and I certainly appreciate that, so that we don't have a renegade staff member out there going, "Ooh, let's see, we'll try and." I think that's a very good guideline. So I'm also, if you want to establish that and put on an annual review basis and strike the word ad hoc, that's not a trouble or a concern to staff either.
Your second comment there, an annual review basis being a subcommittee or the council? What did you mean by your last comment?
Well, I think when I'll use our rate study example, having a ad hoc committee review the performance results and get into some of the more detail I think that's good, and then the council can brief just like we use. I think that's probably more appropriate certainly, there isn't anything wrong with us including a requirement that there's an annual report that comes back to the council either. So
Those were two items.
I see those as two different things. One would be the committee or subcommittee would review that and help craft the annual report that comes back. So I don't have a qualm with either of those two outgrowths.
Do you feel that we have any other invested monies? I know we have money in extremely safe, very boring items. Are there other items that would ever fall under this at this point? Or is this the one that we have?
I think right now, off the top of my head, the other two investment portfolios based on council's adopted policy, I mean, we put money in LAIF, and that's about as conservative as we can get. So as long as our policies are that way, and then certainly the committee can help us to establish what our policy going forward for the OPEB trust would be, our initial investment tolerance, and also, we also have the ability to change our program administration. Mike seems to be having a mind of its own tonight after. So, I mean, those are some internal things, and PARS has certainly indicated that, they're here to support what the organization wants to do, not what they want to do.
Okay, thank you. I would just say that I think this is a very important step for the town. One thing that I don't want to overlook is establishing an irrevocable trust fund is, in my opinion, very important. Politicians have a habit of going into earmarked money and doing other things with it. So I think it's a responsible thing to turn around and make sure that could never happen in the future, which I'm sure it wouldn't, but we might as well be sure. Secondly, I don't personally have any hesitation about doing this in this relationship with PARS. I think that it makes a lot of sense. It does sound like the right program for us. And it is essential, and the town manager pointed that out, to have somebody who, especially when you have a specific item like this that is governmental, that they are experienced in administering that. You don't want to end up with issues with that. So I do agree with especially with the comments you've made. I think it's a little more than an act of faith. I think we have data behind to say that it's going to work. And we have a 90-day clause that say if it doesn't, we'll go the other way. So I think that is very important. So I don't have any hesitation in supporting the resolution. Is there any further comments?
Well, I think that it's a good idea to add the ad hoc committee.
I agree with that. Does everybody agree that that makes sense?
Yes, and secondly, we should have the annual
Annual
review.
review, yes. Would you like to make a motion towards that?
With those changes, I will make a motion to approve Resolution Number 295311, approving the establishment of OPED, Other Post-Employment Benefit Trust Fund with PARS, Public Agency Retirement Services.
And for clarification, the changes to that resolution were establishing a subcommittee and also having an annual report to the council. Is there a second?
Second.
Any further discussion? All in favor of the resolution?
Aye.
I hear none that will be opposed. That motion passes unanimously. Thank you very much. First, I thought you might be a guy looking for the French Laundry if you have a tie on in Yountville, so. But we're glad you came. Thank you for making the trip. Thank you. Congratulations. Moving on to item C. This is, I believe, a discussion item. There will not be action taken, but direction will be provided to staff on the concept of a town wayfinding sign program. Staff report, please.
Thank you. There's been interest expressed in the business community for establishing what's typically called a wayfinding sign program. These sign programs are generally consist of clusters of small identification signs that are mounted in a metal framework and located in the public sidewalk in the commercial districts. They are pedestrian in scale, and they identify businesses and also give other types of information, distance, direction, that type of information. There are 3 communities in our local region that have these programs already implemented, including the cities of Napa, Sonoma, and Healdsburg. Each of these cities differs in how they determine eligibility for participating in the program and how they recover costs for these programs. And by example, the city of Healdsburg requires the business to be located in the downtown business district, but excludes businesses that are directly fronting on their plaza, their town square there. They limit the business to 2 signs. This is an early example of how they arrayed their signs in a framework. The Mission Bell is now gone from their program, but it reappeared in Sonoma's. This is Sonoma. This is Healdsburg. In the city of Healdsburg, some of the other criteria they use is that the business must be open on weekends. The business must primarily meet the needs of visitors, and service businesses and offices are generally excluded. The signs are funded in part through their redevelopment agency. They charge an initial processing fee, which covers up to 2 signs of the same design. Contrariwise, the city of Sonoma, they allow businesses based in proximity to the plaza to participate, with the first preference given to those that front on the plaza. They have established a prioritization scheme based on proximity and distance from the plaza in Sonoma, and they give, in order of priority, first to retail businesses, restaurants, pubs, taverns, wine tasting, sales, and businesses with an entrance on the periphery block through these paseos, so they call them. They have a lot of central block businesses in Sonoma that aren't evident from the street. And you have to go down these breezeways in order to access them. Number 2 priority are individual businesses of the same type in Category 1 within a paseo access from the periphery block. Number 3, businesses in Category 1 on a second periphery block from the plaza. 4, personal service businesses, and last, office uses. They pay for their initial sign costs through the city's economic development program, and the replacement signs are paid for directly by the businesses. This is more Healdsburg. This is a Healdsburg plan view of how they array their signs. You notice around the plaza there are no directly on the plaza businesses. They're down the streets from the plaza. And this is a concept I'll get to in a minute. In the city of Napa, they are generally restricted to for-profit businesses as opposed to nonprofits. They saw this as a means to, and this is the example of Napa's sign program. They saw this as a means to address the issue they were having with A-frame signs being placed out at the sidewalk. And following the implementation of this, the A-frames were banned from the sidewalk. They have a subscription plan as the way they pay for theirs. They sell subscriptions to have a presence on these clustered sign posts. This last slide I was showing has to do with there's a number of, listed in the staff report, a list of goals that would be achieved by the wayfinding sign program, obviously orienting locals and visitors to locations primarily within the commercial districts, using it as a navigation tool and promoting an awareness of all the town assets. And in Yountville, there is a issue with, we have kind of two commercial nodes, north and south, or maybe even dividing the south one into a more midtown and southern, that would be past, say, where you would find past Hurley's in that direction, the community center being the dividing point. But a lot of visitors are unaware of the northern node of up at North Washington. So it would be a means to make them aware of all of our commercial assets and direct them to them. We could also use this for other assets we have in town, such as the Art Walk, historical buildings, some of our LEED certified buildings. What this is, what you're seeing on the screen is an idea of expanding on rather than just being placards for identifying individual businesses, and it could initially or eventually develop into the use of a digital kiosk idea, to where you would use iPads that are secured in these metal frames that are vandal-proof, and they would have any type of information on the town, about our restaurants, our inns, civic events, civic festivals, schedules and of events at the community center, programs at the community center. They could also be accessed by certainly the residents to find that information as well. In general, the wayfinding sign programs, they're at a pedestrian scale, and they encourage walking through town. And as listed in all of these goals, there's other numerous goals that they lend the impression of an orderly community that's proud of their businesses and informs visitors of the businesses. Some of these frames for securing these iPads or whatever would be used in them these are examples, and here's a stainless steel one, and some of these other metal frames I have shots of. So what's being requested tonight is a response from in reaction to this program from the council. And follow-up steps would be to coordinate with the chamber and local businesses as to who may participate, what the signs will actually consist of in terms of material, size, location, and how they'll be paid for. So if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer.
Do we have any specific questions of staff at this point?
I have one, and that is, you said in your report that commercial stakeholders have expressed an interest. I'd like to know which commercial stakeholders have expressed the interest.
Well, Vintage Estates, for one, which is a lot of businesses. Of course, B Marketplace, Villaggio, Vintage Inn.
We've also had Plaza Corsia. There's also been a request on the part of council for us to try to address some of the chasing of A-frames. While we don't have the Paseo situation that they do in, say, the Plaza in Sonoma, what we do have is that we have the Edward James Plaza, for example, and we have V Marketplace, Plaza Corsia, and even to a certain degree Washington Square, although most people have taken that off there. So what we really looked at is linkage. In other words, if somebody is parked in one location, how do we encourage them to go north or south? And then secondly, when we started thinking about it, and we had to take, I have to challenge, we had to get out of our own mindset going, well, we know where everything is. Well, no. Do you really know what's in Washington Square? Do you really know what's in Plaza Corsia? And, I will just tell you, because most of the council has communicated at some point in time to a staff member about X businesses' illegal sign, in their opinion, or an entry open. And we've had general, especially you may recall there's been a lot of press lately in the Napa Valley Register for their program, because that's come up recently. So we have basically told the business community that we would take a look at it. We don't have an economic development agency or a redevelopment agency, so I've been very good at setting a stage, which is we'll evaluate something, but you're going to have to come up with a program to administer the cost. And if done right, this can be a favorable thing and help our business community, because frankly, we do want our business community to be successful. We also want it to look, I don't know if I always thought about orderly, but we want it to look quaint, and a lot of people, I mean, staff does not enjoy being A-frame police. I mean, and the idea of coming up with a program to regulate A-frames is certainly another alternative, but to me that would actually be more cumbersome and more costly, because then you'd have, an A-frame permit. I'd imagine it having to go before the ZDRB for approval and review, and it just doesn't seem business friendly. Whereas trying to sit down with the business community and say, are you interested in helping us to craft a program using some of these elements? Again, we have a linear pattern, so our signage program might require more signs in some cases to get there, but that's really what we're asking is okay from you to start. We don't know quite where this will go yet.
And also, I would point out that, back to your question, we do have kind of a very abbreviated clustered signs that direct at Whistle Stop to businesses that are in that building where the Yountville Sun is, and there has been specific interest as well from Gordon's Gallery that's a little off the street and in this program.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
No, thank you.
I will take the opportunity to open this up to the two remaining public members. Either of you wish to make any comments at this point? No? All right. Bringing this back to council for discussion. Would you like to start, Councilor Boermaker? No, you would not? Councilor Hall.
Why not? Thanks for the report. When I initially read it, the first thing that went through my mind, and Steve, I think you encapsulated it properly, is Yountville big enough to need directional signs? I mean, this is a small town, but I live here, and I know, or I think I know where everything is, although don't test me. And so my initial reaction when I read it was, what are we doing? This is, we're maybe a mile and a half long, although someone could challenge me on that. But I do understand specifically where it comes back to the linkage between the north and the south end of town, where this might actually provide some benefit. Obviously it would have to be done in the Yountville way, whatever that means, underlined with quotes and parentheses. But I think that to your point, Steve, and obviously, the work that you've done in this, at least giving us some ideas of what others have done, the options that may be out there. We really, as a town, we want to encourage and see the success of our businesses, but at the same time, I don't know how much we want to take on in the form of cost, maintenance, et cetera. I don't know that how inexpensive or expensive an iPad or an electronic option might be, but it just seems like the infrastructure associated with that, someone managing it, et cetera, might be cumbersome. I don't know. That obviously would be to be evaluated. But I think it could be done in the right way. I think that businesses, I don't know how you segregate, and I know in reading the material that you presented, there are some that require that only the for-profits are in it and the nonprofits aren't, and some that require in a business district for them to be involved, but those that are outside aren't, or maybe it was the opposite. I'm not exactly sure how you pull that off, but I think if you explored it and you got enough support, it sounds like you've got a list of businesses that are interested in this. We should maybe develop or create discourse around it and hopefully come up with something that would be economical for not just the town, but for the businesses that I would trust would support this effort. Again, if you pulled it off and you did it in the Yountville way, it really could provide that link, and people would stop, asking where the French Laundry is. I think maybe you could also put a sign that would direct them to where the Yountville Crossroad is, rather than Mulberry Street.
Yeah, it was mentioned, sorry if you
Please, I was done.
I was going to follow up. I didn't mention that that's another potential use is to direct to parking, public restrooms, public transportation, the crossroads.
Historical elements, gas station.
Well,
I
and
mean,
our
we could-
facilities, as you said, I mean,
The
we've,
same thing, a historical element in the gas station?
I think, when we sit down, I think,
I'm kidding.
I just think there could be,
I understand.
there could be more than we think, and I'm just shocked. One of the other common questions that I get run into on often, where's an ATM?
what the Lincoln Theater, I mean, very, very good
So
question.
if we take a step back, there, and again, I think staff definitely agrees that the mechanism needs to be done in a way that is uniquely Yountville, as we like to say.
Right.
And we don't know what that is yet, in all honesty.
Councilor Mueller, comments?
I think that, I think the town needs this. I think that, for better or worse, we are a tourist town, and we have a lot of tourists looking for whatever. If I had $1 for every time someone asked me where the French Laundry was, I think I could help the OPEB fund significantly. So I definitely think we need something like this. I also think that we need to have the businesses working probably, with the town's organization, with the chamber, and putting this together. And like Steve has reminded me many, many times, we're not going to do anything if there's no funding source. So I think that I will defer to Steve. I know he's not going to do anything without a funding source, and we obviously don't have a funding source. So the more creative everyone can be to get this worked out, I'm all for it. In terms of those little kiosks, all I know is, I bought a Betamax when the VCRs came in. I guess what I'm going to say is, as soon as you put something in like that, it's going to be obsolete. If you can do it cheap enough so you can be willing to throw it away when it becomes obsolete, and it will in a short amount of time, I'm fine. But I know people walk around with their little handheld phones all the time and are trying to tell me there's some place in town because it says so on Yelp, and I know there isn't because I live here. But, they won't like to argue with you anyway. So, I don't know if that's really needed, but if the businesses want to support that, and we can, put some staff time in, I think it's a great thing to do.
Chance number 2?
Okay. Having served on the Zoning and Design Review Board and knowing how careful we are about signage in town, I am definitely willing to go along with looking into this, but I have to tell you that the examples that you have shown look like visual noise to me, and I don't find them either attractive nor appropriate for our town. So I think that we would have, it would really depend on design and also the who's going to pay for it. And so, I still think that we're a very small town. Maybe I could see a sign that would direct people to the fact that we have essentially 2 retail areas. But anyway, on the other hand, I really do want our businesses to succeed. I really do want to support them. If they're willing to step up, I'm willing to look at the design.
I'll agree with generally all the comments that have been made here. I think that this is a very good idea. I actually think that downtown Napa, they put theirs up recently, is greatly enhanced by it, especially the fact that, if they have an empty storefront, you see, well, wow, there is actually something down there to go to. And I do think that we greatly underestimate when somebody comes to town. This is actually a very distributed town. It may only be 1.5 miles, but if you think about Sonoma Square, for example, you just sort of walk around the square. I think it would be extremely useful for people who are on the south part of town to get the mid part of town, as you said, and especially the north end always says, we need some love, and I think that this would be an excellent way to do that. So I certainly support the concept. I do think, talking about money, this is a benefit to business, and I think it should really be driven. I think the funding should come from that. I think the Chamber of Commerce should be heavily involved. TBID has some money that might make some sense on this, and I think that the next step would be is to go to those organizations and to talk through that with them, and then to take it to the ZDRB to talk through some kind of parameters, and then bring that back to the council. So does that sound agreeable to everyone? Does staff have sufficient direction? Excellent. Thank you for that. It's always good to bring forth good ideas or ideas that we may or may not like, but keep bringing them. Item number 11, staff information reports. Do we have any staff information reports? We have none, I see. Council member meeting reports. Does anybody have any meetings to report on? A here is Napa County Flood Control and Conservation District. The mayor is not here, and I don't know if that meeting even happened. NCTPA is tomorrow. Is someone attending in council or mayor's spot? You have any interest in going tomorrow as the alternate?
Oh, no,
No?
I'm sorry. I have to be in the city tomorrow.
Okay. So I will see you there. Any other meetings that we have missed? Any council member reports? You want to start, Marita?
Well, I would like to say that I learned quite late, and I'm so embarrassed to know this, that I did not know that Napa has a sister city in Japan. It's I wrote it down. Iwanuma. And Iwanuma, unfortunately, was right in the path of the tsunami. And so the city of Napa is looking into putting on an event to help raise funds for the victims of the earthquake and flood there, and I am assisting them. And we have already been offered the Napa Valley Opera House in which to hold the event. It'll be very soon, and I will let you know when it will be.
Excellent. Anybody else have any comments?
I only have one thing. I trust at least council and staff got the email and is aware that this Friday is the Open Artist Studios starting. I think it's all weekend long. So that should be a lot of fun, rain or shine. At least it's going to be inside. And obviously, as everyone hears, hopefully wear Taste of Yountville, rain or shine. So get your umbrellas. Your parasols. Yeah, your suntan lotion.
Could I add
Yes.
one more thing?
Another comment?
There's just one more thing, and this is, I would like to make an official happy birthday to a very good town member, Donna Hine. It's her birthday.
I have one comment. The Yountville Elementary School Red and White fundraiser was this past Saturday. That event is sponsored by the PTA and also was participated in by the Yountville School Foundation. And I know that it was an extremely successful event, and I don't think there are final numbers, but my understanding is the take will be a record in terms of the fundraising amount. So thank you to the community for continuing to support our elementary school. And with that, item 13, future agenda items we have listed in the agenda, and I will not read them out. Are there any other items to add to this at this point? I'll take that as a no. Item 14, closed session. As said before, we will not have a closed session. Item 15, adjournment. Can I have a motion to adjourn?
I'll make a motion to adjourn this evening.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. That passes unanimously as well. Thank you.